Hey everyone, welcome back to Reading with Tatiana. Today I'm doing my book review on The Paris Library by Janet Skeslien Charles. And the first 80% of this book, I gave it a 3 out of 5, but the last 20% made the book in total a 4 out of 5 book for me. I've added a new section to my videos and it's called the Booktubers Shoutout. So today I want to do a Booktuber Shoutout to Loveless Reads. I came across her channel when I first started my channel and I really enjoy her content because of her personality, her really pretty sweaters, and also the content she does. She covers a lot of POC, people of color, and social justice books, and it's also really neat because she also brings her daughters in once a month to talk about books that they read as well. She also does a mix of hauls at bookstores but also at the library, which I think is really important because I believe libraries are a great public space for people to have access to books and reading. So if you have time, please check out Loveless Reads channel. I'll link it down below as well. Before I get into my review, as always, I would appreciate if you can hit the subscribe button, if you can give this video a thumbs up, and if you want to leave a comment if you read this book or have any commentary or suggestions for future books for me to read as well. The author, Janet, she is originally from Montana in the US and she's born in 1971. In 1999, so around 28 years old, she moved to Paris to work for the American Library where this book is set, and as a programs manager she was inspired by the American Library and the history in the library to write this book. So it's really cool because this book is a mix of fact and fiction, and it's cool how she can personify the history to make it a very enjoyable read. I wasn't able to find too much about Janet online aside from where she's from and what she's currently doing, but I did find a fun fact about her that she's fluent in English, French, and Russian. The Paris Library, however, isn't her debut novel. Her debut novel is called Moonlight in ODESSA, and I wanted to read a blurb about it because due to the blurb that I found about it, it's definitely going to be on my to-be-read list. So the short blurb I found about Moonlight in ODESSA is, it's a short history of tractors in Ukrainian meets desperate housewives. In this exploration of the booming business of Russian email brides, an industry where love and marriage collide with sex and commerce. The novel is also set in Ukraine, which I think will be interesting, as to be honest, I don't know too much about Ukraine, so it'll be cool to read her fictional story around it, and if there's any also facts mixed into the story as well. Other little section I want to add to my reviews is sharing the year the book was published and also the genre, just because when I read reviews online for books, I find that books that are very recent and very popular on lots of book clubs and lots of bestsellers usually get like really skewed high ratings, but as time passes I find the ratings are more accurate because a good book should be timeless and classic, and if it has a strong 4+ reading on Goodreads reads after decades of it being out, I really believe that is a good book. So this book, The Paris Library, is published in 2021 and the genre is historical fiction. Now I'll talk a bit about the story and the book as well. So it's very common in historical fictions that I've noticed that there are usually dual timelines. So in this book we follow two main characters, Odile in 1940s Paris, where she works for the American Library during the German occupation, and in the second timeline, which is more recent but still in the past, still 40 years ago, is in 1980s Montana, and we follow Lily's story. And it's interesting for this one because Odile is in both timelines. So in the 1940s Paris timeline, she is in her early 20s, and then in the 1980s, 40 years later, she is in her 60s. So it's kind of cool to see her growth throughout the decades, and then also seeing how Lily impacts her. Lily's also a high school student in her last year of high school. In the first timeline with Odile in 1940s Paris, we find that Odile gets a job at the American Library, and we also learn about her situation. So her dad wants to marry her off, and she meets Paul, who's her love interest in the novel. We find that she befriends people in the American Library, people who are co-workers or volunteer, like Margaret, a British expat in Paris during this time, and also her relationship with the subscribers. And with Odile's timeline, we find that the library is such an important place during a time of war because they do a really good job of making sure subscribers, which are the same as like people like me and you, who are subscribed to the library to make sure they still get books, get news and that kind of stuff, because back then, you know, there wasn't the internet. So the best way people could get the news of the war is through the library, through journals and newspapers. Books were also a way for escapism during the war. And during the time of the occupation, Odile and her co-workers would also deliver books to subscribers who were banned from the library because they were Jewish. They would also go to hospitals to read to soldiers who were injured. So in Dale's timeline, it really shows the importance and the beauty of libraries and books, which I thought was really cool and kind of makes you really appreciate, and for me to fall in love with the idea of libraries and books again. The second timeline, we follow Lily, who is a high school student in her final year of high school in Montana, and she is the neighbor of Odile, who is now in her 60s and is known as a recluse in the town. Lily is having a hard time because her mom recently passed away, and then her dad, like the stereotypical, gets married really quickly to a much younger woman who's only 10 years older than Lily, so like 28, and have two kids shortly, like one after the other. So then Lily has a lot of, like, she feels out of place, she feels forgotten, she's struggling a lot. So we see this beautiful friendship form between Lily and Odile, which is a very unlikely friendship between like a young teenager and also a older lady. And again, this is a spoiler-free review, so we see how their relationship and their friendship helps each other become a better person and go over any demons they may have or struggles in life. As this video is a spoiler-free review, I don't want to talk too much about the characters or that kind of stuff, but it's pretty cool because with Odile in the 1940s Paris, we see lots of people in her life that have very different parts in the war. Her twin brother goes to war as a soldier, her dad is a police officer in Paris, and it's just really cool to see all these different aspects of war they don't really think about, and how they all have a part in it, and how you see like different parts of daily life during wartime. Common themes in the book that I notice is, the first one is how libraries are so important during the formation years of her life, or even reading, because for Odile, she read really early thanks to her aunt, and because of this she had a love for books and a love for the library. And I love throughout her whole book how they sprinkle in different quotes from literary works throughout like real life, so it just makes you appreciate how sometimes when words fail you for certain situations, you can always rely on books or an author or a quote to really help you validate how you feel. A second common theme that kind of ties into the first one is the idea of how books can be a method of escapism, especially during times of war and times of struggle. And you know, Odile refers to books a lot when there's any situation, and she kind of categorizes everything she relates to, everything she experiences, by category in a Dewey Decimal System, which I thought was kind of neat. A very common theme in the book is the idea of family and loyalty, and how it's so important to do things for your family and sacrificing things, thinking about the bigger picture and not putting yourself first. Odile and Lily both experienced this in their separate timelines, and it's really cool to see how they really care for their family and the sacrifices they make for their family. And adding on to the theme of family is with Odile especially. She forms friendships at the library she works at with Bitsy and Margaret, who she didn't know before working there, and it's really neat to see how they support each other through times of war or times of conflict, struggles, and how they're able to work together to persevere through hard times. So it talks about friendship a lot in the book, and you can see the sacrifices they make for each other as well. So two common things that I didn't enjoy the book, that was especially towards the end, is one character, they really changed sides all of a sudden, and it seemed so out of character, and it kind of felt like the author Janet had an end in mind and she tried to work backwards, which kind of felt kind of forced. So that was one thing I didn't enjoy about the book, but it's also possible because the book was told in Odile's perspective that maybe she was blindsided, or maybe she saw this person with rose-colored glasses. So if I look at it that way, I can see maybe that was the purpose that Janet tried to do, but for me, I did not enjoy it because it really seemed out of character from what we've been given so far as a reader. The second thing I didn't enjoy, which kind of ties into the first one, but as this video is spoiler free, I can't really give too many details, but I guess I'll just say that a lot of the main characters, there were times when I felt like they did some actions that were so not aligned or misaligned with how their characters were revealed to us throughout the novel. And I get why they would do it because that's a huge plot turner, but it just didn't seem to make sense for me and seemed very shocking. And I felt like as a reader who has read and invested to his character for a few hundred pages, it's just kind of shocking that the character would do that, because I felt, as a reader, I would have the inside scoop of the internal thoughts of that character to see why they would do the actions they did. So that was like really frustrating for me to see. Things I did enjoy about this novel is the first one is, I said before, appreciating libraries and books again and importance they have in our lives, especially the formation years of our youth as well. Other aspect I like of this novel is that Odile is in the timeline in 1940s and also a timeline in 1980s, so it's really neat to be able to see her growth as a person and also try to piece the pieces that are missing between the war and also how she got to Montana. The final thing I really enjoy about the book that I would like to share is, as I mentioned earlier, it's really neat because in this novel, the characters quote a lot of literary works from before to I guess validate or make sense of what they're experiencing and feeling. And it's interesting because a meta layer is this book, I feel, has lots of quotable quotes that I would use for the future. So I just wanted to share them. So the first one is, in the book at one point, they talk about the perfect novel. Its ending is inevitable, yet somehow a surprise. And that's like a really good quote, and I like that to carry about books that I've enjoyed in the past that maybe weren't like page turners or maybe weren't like award-winning books, but I really enjoyed them because everything kind of works out and it's just kind of nice to read a happy story about people. The second quote I really enjoy in this book is, "People I would never know but never forget." So I really enjoyed that quote because I think that really applies to lots of novels I've read in the past where obviously these characters, they're not real and I'll never meet them. However, they have an impact on me, and I think about how they acted in a novel and in different situations and how I would act in the same situation, how sometimes characters can be quite inspirational or have an impact on me in the future even though they aren't real. So I really love that quote that Janet created in this novel. The last quote I like to share from the book is, "Find your passion, but also make sure you can pay the bills." And I love this because I feel when you're young, you're kind of like given this idea that you should just find your passion and make it your job, so it never feels like you work in a day. And that's great if you're able to do that, but for a lot of people, that's not realistic. So I love that quote that Janet put in this book, and I think it's also applicable to the mass majority of the population. On Goodreads, this book, The Paris Library by Janet Skeslien Charles, got a average 4.09 out of 5, which is quite high, so it is a good read. Reasons why people gave it a bad review is they felt there were too many characters, and because of that, it was hard to deeply connect to any single character. They felt that some side characters didn't have to be in the book, which I can agree with. There were two characters in the American Library who were kind of like, I guess, a comic relief in the novel, but to be honest, if they weren't in the book, I don't think it would have been missing, you know what I mean? So I agree with that bad review. A second common bad review I saw in Goodreads, which I agree with and I mentioned earlier about things I didn't like, is that it felt like the author wrote with an end in mind and then she worked backwards, or sometimes it's kind of better if you can't work from beginning to front, I guess, and just seeing where the story takes you. Or maybe she just needed a longer book to let the plot form a bit more before reaching that conclusion. Good reviews on Goodreads is that they found this book engaging and well written, which I totally agree with. It was super easy to read and it felt very flowy to me. People enjoyed the dual timelines and also being able to see Odile in both of them. And then a very common review I saw, especially for 5 out of 5s, is that people really enjoyed that the focus, despite it being historical fiction set in German-occupied Paris during World War II, is that they felt this book focused more on the individual people and than the war itself, which I totally agree with. Like, there were times in the book that I'm like, I forget they're even occupied or is World War II, because it really focused on like the little happy victories that people can have in their daily life when everything kind of isn't going so well. Why I think you should read this book is if you love reading, which you probably do because you're watching this book review, or if you want to fall in love with the appreciation of books again, this book is for you. If you like historical fiction, especially set during World War II in Paris, also good for you. And also, like, it's quite enjoyable read, and Janet's writing is very flowy, so sometimes it's just nice to read a book that just goes really well together. So those are 2 reasons why you should read this book. Now I'll share how this book made me feel. As always, I like to share this because if you ask me next week, in a month, a year, 5 years from now, I probably won't remember the characters or what happened in the book, but I'll always remember how a book made me feel. So this book, when I finished it, made me feel like a believer. Again, this is spoiler-free review, so I can't say the specifics why, but it really shows me that people can change no matter what age, and we're not always stuck in set in our ways, and that gives me hope, and it makes me a believer that people can change despite how you meet them at first and how much you don't like them at first either. Okay, so this is my book review on The Paris Library by Janet Skeslien Charles. If you read this book, let me know what you think in the comments down below. And if you have any recommendations for me, I'll always appreciate for my next book to read. If you want to join me for my next book, I am reading Against the Loveless World by Susan Abulhawa. Sorry if I said it wrong. And this book, I already know it's going to be a quite heavy read. It's about a Palestinian woman who is in a Rizli prison in confinement, and she shares her story about escaping her home and fleeing to Jordan as a Palestinian refugee. So if you want to join, feel free, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!